My husband had an emotional affair with a colleague, but he says he wants to stay together and work on our marriage. My husband, 33M, and I, 33F, have been together for over 12 years and married for over 5 years. We have 2 children together, the older is 4 years old, and our baby is 6 months old. My husband is American, and I'm from Europe, and we live in my home country. We did long distance for about 4 years before he moved here to be with me. Jason, my husband, started a new job last fall and was working really long hours. I spent most days just trying to manage the kids, the house, the dog, and our other animals. I was so overwhelmed dealing with all of that, plus I have a history of depression, so the postpartum journey was really something. The pregnancy itself was difficult because I had gestational diabetes that got pretty bad, and I experienced Braxton Hicks contractions for the last 4 months of the pregnancy. During this time, Jason befriended a colleague, Beth. He started out being honest, telling me what they talked about, and sharing things about her. I was never jealous or suspicious because he was so forthcoming about everything. Beth had gotten married just a few months before and had 2 small children like we do. A few months went by, and I noticed that Jason started being weird with his phone. He took it everywhere and never left it out of his sight. He was also texting a lot more than usual and smiling at his phone. Additionally, he and Beth were having secret conversations through an app where you could only read the messages once before they disappeared, and all you could see afterward was that the message had been delivered. At this point, alarm bells started going off, and I asked Jason point blank if something was going on between him and Beth. He promised there was absolutely nothing going on and said the messages were about work. He explained that Beth had a work phone, and their company could supposedly access the messages, so they used this method to avoid getting her in trouble. He also told me Beth was having some issues with her husband and that he was trying to be there for her. The feeling that something was off just wouldn't go away. I kept trying to convince myself that I was crazy and imagining things. He was still weird about his phone, so I told him that I felt like I was going crazy and needed him to be honest. At this point, he told me that a few days earlier, Beth had confessed she had a crush on him. He said he was upset because she was his friend and confidant, and now he couldn't continue talking to her in the same way. I was somewhat relieved because it meant I wasn't crazy. The following weekend, Jason was going to his work Christmas party in a nearby big city. It was also his goodbye party because he had quit. I had previously warned him to be careful around Beth at the Christmas party since she was sad and there would be drinking involved. The night before, I woke up in the middle of the night with the most awful feeling, so I went through his phone. We've always had full access to each other's phones, including passcodes. I found an archived chat where Beth told him she loved him. His reply was, "I love you too. Good night, beautiful." I was heartbroken and livid. I woke him up at 3:30 a.m. and yelled at him. I called him a liar and a cheater. I told him I deserved better than this, and I couldn't believe he would do this to me, to us. My parents divorced because my dad cheated on my mom, so cheating is a really sensitive issue for me. Jason had also been caught texting 2 other girls before, once in the very beginning of our relationship and again about 2 weeks before our wedding. I was able to forgive him for these incidents after a lot of talking and work, but those situations had never progressed to even close to this point. Jason said he didn't know why he had told Beth he loved her because he didn't mean it. He suspects it was a reflex, and since it was right before bed, he was tired and out of it. It sounded like he was still planning to go to the Christmas party, which was an overnight trip. I told him I couldn't guarantee that the kids and I would be home if he went, so he stayed. There was a lot of arguing over the next couple of days, and he also confessed to having a crush on Beth. She wouldn't stop texting him during the weekend and even sent him a long message where she basically said goodbye, adding that she was sad he didn't come to the Christmas party and missed seeing her in lingerie she had bought just for him. Jason was visibly shocked. He had previously told me that they had agreed never to take things further because neither of them was willing to leave their family. Beth's texting got to the point where I texted her from his phone, first as myself and then as Jason. I know pretending to be him wasn't the right thing to do, so I told him exactly what I did and said, which was essentially to leave us alone and stop texting. I asked Jason to block her on everything because they were not platonic, and she couldn't stay in his life if he wanted to stay married to me. He gave me his phone to keep for the time being so that he couldn't secretly text anyone. He slept in the spare bedroom that night, but I was probably too lenient and let him come back to our room the next day. The following Monday, he had to go to work to sign some paperwork about overtime pay. He was supposed to hang out with another colleague, a man, that night, but it got moved to the next day. Jason said he needed someone to talk to. I was freaking out when he left but calmed down after talking to my mom. He kept texting me updates about what was going on and when he was coming home. He also told me openly what he and his colleague had talked about, so I didn't worry. However, the next day, after taking the dog for a walk, Jason came back and got on his computer. He has an iPhone and a MacBook, so they're connected. A weird notification popped up, and when I checked his phone, I found a deleted conversation between him and Beth. Apparently, she had a second number I didn't know about. The texts were about meeting up the day before. He said he had changed his mind and came straight home instead. He had also texted her as soon as he could to tell her that it wasn't him texting her. I felt like he had stabbed me in the back. I don't expect him to always agree with me, but I do expect him to always have my back. But he didn't. This hurt more than finding out about his emotional affair. I gave him a few options. 1. Let's get an amicable divorce, and he can be with Beth. We'll split custody of the kids 50-50. 2. We stay married, work hard at it, and he has to cut Beth out completely, no contact whatsoever. 3. If he chooses option 2 but I find out he lied and kept in contact with Beth, I would not only divorce him but also seek full custody of the kids. He chose option 2 because he says he's still in love with me and wants us to stay together as a family. We've started going to couples counseling because we have a hard time communicating. We always end up getting defensive, and it devolves into an argument. He also ended up locking me out of his phone by changing the passcode. He said he felt like he had no privacy and didn't trust me not to go through private conversations, like those between him and his dad. Apparently, one of our arguments was very similar to a conversation he had with his dad, so he assumed I had snooped through it, which I didn't. I feel like it's a bit backwards that he doesn't trust me after all his lies. During our first counseling session, I admitted I wasn't sure if I wanted us to be together or not. I love him. He's the love of my life, my best friend, and the father of my kids. But he broke me. He broke my heart and my trust. He's apologized sincerely, but in the 2 months since I found out, I haven't really seen any actions to support this. How can I be sure he won't do this to me again? I don't know how much of me would be left if I had to go through this again. I am wondering, was what we had enough to justify putting in months, maybe years, of work to get past this, if he's just going to do it again? Do I stay and show my kids that some things are worth fighting for, even though I'm unhappy and feel broken right now? Or do I show them that this is not okay in a relationship or marriage and file for divorce? Update. If I weren't in the middle of this, I know I would give the same advice to someone else, leave and file for divorce. But we have 2 kids together, and our relationship isn't all bad. Jason has started taking on more responsibility with the kids. He started his own business and works mostly from home. He's happier now, being able to spend more time with all of us. I'm not so naive as to think something like this could never happen again. I sometimes also wonder if there could be someone else out there who would love me unconditionally and not seek validation outside of our relationship, especially during what was probably the lowest point of my life. I no longer have fantasies about growing old together or living happily ever after. I just try to take it one day at a time. I've managed to go quite a while without thinking about it, but in calm and quiet moments, like when I'm driving, I go over it in my head again and again. I replay the things I wish I'd said and the things I wish he'd done differently. Our communication skills still need a lot of work, but they are improving. I'm also trying to set clearer personal boundaries. For example, I've asked for more hugs and kisses that aren't meant to lead to intimacy. I've started taking better care of myself, too. I went abroad for a weekend by myself to see an artist I've followed for years but never had the chance to see live. I also bought a ticket for another concert this spring. I don't feel guilty about doing things for myself anymore, which I used to, like I was being selfish. I've also started a new job that's a great step forward in my career, while Jason stayed home to be with our little one. We're still working toward a future together, but I feel like I have more realistic goals now. Unless something dramatic happens, I think we'll continue like this.